Two staff members of the Israeli embassy in Washington were shot and killed outside of a Jewish museum in the U.S. Capitol last night. The suspect is now in custody. Authorities say he yelled, "Free, free Palestine," after being arrested. Now, for more on this, let's bring in our Washington correspondent, Reggie Cicchini. So, Reggie, this is drawing condemnation worldwide, but let's start with how this all unfolded. What do we know so far?
Well, Miranda, what we understand is that this event was taking place at the Capitol Jewish Museum here in Washington, D.C., just a few blocks away from the U.S. Capitol, also just a few blocks away from the FBI headquarters. And around 9 o'clock Wednesday night, it's reported that the suspect was walking around the building, where inside the building there was a diplomatic event going on that was thrown by an NGO called Israel Aid, and it had been opened up to dozens of different diplomatic missions around the Washington area here. And the event was actually focused on attempts to bolster and bring in more humanitarian aid from Israel into Palestine. And that followed news earlier in the day that some 100 aid trucks had been able to cross into the besieged region here. At some point during this event, we know that the shooting ultimately unfolded, killing two Israeli staff members that were inside this event. But again, it was not an event that was being held at the Israeli embassy. It was at a museum, and it had been opened up to dozens of other international missions that are located here in the district.
And Reggie, what more do we know about the victims? We're hearing reports that they were a couple and they had a big event coming up in the next month or so. So what more do we know about that?
Yes. Yeah, according to Israeli officials, the two victims in this were actually set to be engaged at an event next month in Israel. They were both members of the Israeli embassy here. Both of them were in their 20s, and it's not clear whether or not these two were kind of targeted or how they were kind of picked out of the crowd here. That is going to be a part of the investigation that is ongoing, but we have heard words of condolences from a number of members of the Israeli parliament, as well as Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who has also ordered that flags at not only the Israeli embassy here in Washington, but at missions around the world, those flags are going to be at half staff here. Netanyahu saying in a statement, "We're witnessing the terrible cost of anti-Semitism and the wild incitement against the state of Israel." Those are the words coming from Benjamin Netanyahu this morning.
Well, Reggie, I want to talk more about the response that is coming out of Israel. There's been some very strong words actually for the leaders of several Western nations, including Canada, actually accusing them of encouraging this type of hateful act. So what's the reasoning for this, and who exactly is saying this?
Right. So there are a number of different Israeli cabinet members who are being vocal this morning against Western nations who have been pushing back on policy coming out of Israel and policy coming out of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who in recent days has announced that the operation in Gaza is going to expand, even though we're hearing kind of pushback from the United Nations and other relief organizations saying that the risk for more death, the risk for famine is only increasing. This morning, the minister responsible for diaspora, along with the foreign minister, had harsh words for Western nations, including the United Kingdom, France, and Canada, who jointly put out a statement earlier this week criticizing the expanding offensive in Gaza, saying that it is a disproportionate act. And the words coming from some of those ministers say that cowardice has a price, and the price is being paid in Jewish blood. That is kind of the sentiment coming out of Israel right now, arguing that the kind of criticism of Israeli policy can be directly tied to anti-Semitism around the world and incidents having to do with anti-Semitism. It's also worth pointing out, though, that there are vocal pushbacks coming from within Israel itself. There are former members of government. There are opposition leaders in Israeli parliament who are also pushing back on Netanyahu's plan, saying that these kind of expanded operations rather in Gaza appear to be tied directly to the personal motives of Benjamin Netanyahu. So there is Western condemnation of this. There is also condemnation happening from within Israel itself. Still, still, the incident that took place here in Washington, D.C. is kind of a highlight of that rise in anti-Semitic acts that has been happening not only here in the United States, but around the world. We saw stats from the ADL just earlier this year suggesting that last year in the United States, attacks against Israelis and the Israeli population here in the U.S. were up 5%. So this is something now that D.C. police, the FBI, the Department of Justice as a whole, and U.S. President Donald Trump are keeping a very close eye on.
All right, that is our Washington correspondent, Reggie Cicchini, reporting from the U.S. Capitol. Reggie, thank you so much for that breakdown.